one of the things that they've said to me is that I am responsible for radicalizing you because we have a long history. You were a student at PSU when I was there. You put together some of my events, and somehow they believe. So have I radicalized you in some kind of way that I should be aware of?
You haven't radicalized me, but you supported me in, I should say, you inspired me to be brave. So I'm thankful to you for that.
It is my pleasure to welcome Andy Ngo to the show today. I've known Andy for a very, very long time, and he's a close friend. Andy is an independent journalist and photographer. He lives under threat for his reporting and expertise on American Antifa and the militant far left. He has testified before the U.S. Congress, appeared on countless television shows, radio programs, podcasts, and his journalism has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, the New York Post, Newsweek, Fox News, National Review, and more. He's currently the editor-in-large at the Post Millennial, and his book is Unmasked: Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy. I hope you enjoy the show. Andy Ngo, we've known each other a long time. It's a long time in the making. Great to talk to you.
Hi, Peter. It's I've been looking forward to this, because both you and I, one of our beats, among many things, is talking about the dysfunction in Portland. And
true.
It's so nice to be able to speak to somebody face-to-face who's from Portland.
Who lives in the sewer, the cesspool.
And kind of understands the context behind, let's say, all my reporting for years now about Antifa. I think from the outside, a lot of people, I think one doesn't really understand how bad it is unless you're like from Portland or nearby.
So I moved out of Portland recently, which has been wonderful to me. And I'm not going to say where I moved because, like you, have security concerns. But when I just notice, I just feel lifted. All right, so let's jump into it. So, subway attack, Marine, breaking news, charged. You want to talk about that? You familiar with that case?
Yeah. So while walking here, I got the breaking news alert that in Manhattan, the district attorney there, that's Alvin Bragg, whose campaign, by the way, when he ran for that position, was benefited from George Soros money. That's the side point. But anyways, his office has announced that they will be charging the former Marine Daniel Penny with manslaughter over the death of the violent homeless man, Jordan Neely. That death happened on the 1st of May. It was caught on video. It's led to a number of really violent protests in Manhattan.
And violent and crazy of people blocking trains and things.
Yes,
traffic.
Dangerous protests in the metro subway. People who jumped down onto the tracks. Fortunately, nobody was electrified. People preventing trains from moving. So, in my opinion, creating a hostage situation, injuring police, blaming police for the death of Jordan Neely, even though police actually had nothing to do with it. But
facts don't matter. But
correct.
Okay, yeah.
That's right. Facts
they were
don't matter.
jumping down the train. They were committing social justice down there, though I don't know if they were committing actual social justice, Reed, but they were protesting for social justice. So let's have you're a guy I can always have an honest conversation with. So this is good. We're on the right foot already. So what do you think is going to happen when people know that they will be prosecuted if they attempt to detain and perhaps something goes wrong? Maybe someone hits their head, maybe accidental. Who knows what could happen? Someone pulls out a knife or gun. If someone is terrorizing, and I think that's a reasonable word, you feel free to push back on anything I say. If you think the word terrorizing is too strong, that's fine. We can change it. But a psychotic individual is terrifying a train full of people. Do you think, as a result of this prosecution, people are going to be more or less likely to attempt to detain and stop that man?
Well, obviously, people will be less likely to intervene. In fact, that's already kind of been the trend in our culture. I'm sure you see many of those videos of various acts of violence that are happening in urban public areas, and the response from the public is sort of either indifference, or they might take out a camera to record from a distance, or they just kind of ignore it. Certainly, that's the reality of everyday life in places like Portland and Seattle and San Francisco.
So this case is interesting for a number of reasons. The homeless man who was attacking people on the subway.
He's not accused of attacking people physically. He's been accused by witnesses of making threats of violence.
Okay, but he did attack people previously on the subway.
He has, correct.
Okay,
yes.
so he has a history of attacking people.
Correct. Elderly people in and around the Metro subway in Manhattan.
Okay. This time, he did not physically attack anybody. He threatened to attack people. It so happens that this man was black, and it so happens that the Marine was white. And it's my understanding that he was an equal opportunity offender. He wasn't just threatening white people. He was threatening people of all races. So clearly he hadn't read the intersectional playbook about oppression variables. But fortunately, the district attorney and the court system has. So the man who was white, the Marine, Daniel, put a chokehold on him. Now, you've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. It seems that, to me, he didn't have to kill him. But then again, I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for quite a long time. He probably didn't have any experience beyond white belt level, so he didn't have the technical expertise to necessarily know when to stop. So we now have a situation in which we have racial factors at play.
Can I introduce a detail also to this?
Please.
So, at least as of right now, the only person that the DA's office has announced that they will charge is the former Marine. However, the video that went viral showed that there were other passengers involved in.
Yeah, but were they white?
No, they weren't white.
Okay, well then why would they be charged? No, I'm like totally serious. Why would you charge anyone unless they were white?
Mm-hmm.
How could you achieve social justice if that were the case?
What is social justice, Peter?
Well, you have, that's a really good question. Yes. Can I be blunt with you? Well, do you know that in the last, you've read Cynical Theories, you've read Helen Pluck-LaRosa's work, you've read New Discourses, people are trying to co-opt the meanings of words. And so they'll take a word like inclusion, equity, diversity, words that have a positive emotional valence that sound nice, and they'll completely change the meaning of the word. So are you familiar with the Mott and the Bailey?
No.
Okay. So the Mott is the defensible, and the Bailey is some deranged woke meaning of the word. So when they use social justice, they're not trafficking in ordinary use of the term. It's a very specific use. So social justice, as I define it, is rectifying previous injustice. It's Kendi's. It's basically Kendi's definition. Remediating past injustices through present injustices, remediating present injustices through future injustices. It's equity. So if we want to create more equitable systems, I'm not saying we should. In fact, I don't think we should, but I'm saying if that's the goal, then why would you charge black people for a crime when black people have historically been charged with more crimes than white people and been historically disadvantaged? You wouldn't. Under an equity framework, it doesn't make any sense. So if you really want to commit social justice, then you cannot charge the black people. You can only charge the white people. That perfectly comports with the ideology.
Why do you think this death of Jordan Neely, the now pending charge, why is this a significant story, do you think, to, let's say, the whole United States rather than just a New York-based incident?
Oh, for a lot of reasons. I just read on the BART, which is the San Francisco subway. Excuse me. I can't remember the exact percentage. We'll look it up, but I think it's around half, slightly less than half the people are afraid of getting on the BART because they're afraid of physical violence.
There's been mass robberies on the
not only mass robberies. Have you heard? Of course, have you heard of Wilding? gangs of youth get on and they basically go crazy on people. And I think part of the concern is any attempt at self-defense. You're probably way too young to remember this, but when I was growing up, there was someone named Bernard Goetz.
What's the story? I'm not familiar with it.
He was robbed on a subway system, and the kids fled, and he shot them when he pulled out a gun. Is it Bernard Goetz?
Oh, this is in New York City, right?
Yeah.
And it's all, yes.
And he shot them in the back, and he was charged, and the whole country was polarized, with the right being on one side and the left being on the other side. The left said it was unfair, unjust, or criminal even, because the kids had turned their back to flee after they saw they had a gun. This is my understanding. This is a long time ago. What year was that, Reed? 84. Yeah. So I just had graduated from high school. You're probably too young to remember that.
I don't remember it from, well, it was before I was born. However, that incident has been cited and referenced a lot by left-wing activists and grifters in terms of trying to draw comparisons to what happened to Jordan Neely.
Right. So you asked me the question of why do I think people are so interested and concerned outside of New York? And I think there are historical parallels in this. And one of the reasons I think that they're so interested is older people will remember that. And to what extent does one have a right to self-defense? And to what extent does, if I remember the case correctly, it's they got him on having a concealed weapon and he didn't have a concealed carry permit, which is totally reasonable to me. You can't carry a gun, a concealed weapon, unless you have by law. So that's reasonable. But the idea that if one has the ability to defend oneself, so I think that's part of it. The other part is we know that subway crime has been going up in the city. We know that crime has been going, it's a little blip in Pinker's hypothesis, and people are worried about crime, so they're worried about what should be done about it, and they're also worried about prosecutions. They feel that criminals aren't being prosecuted, particularly for equity-based reasons. And now the new thing is people are trying to throw the race card into the equation.
Well, the mainstream left has been adopting more and more of, or trying to normalize, I guess, a worldview that the protection of one's property or even one's well-being should not happen because, and the
San Francisco,
the slogan they use is, what is it, life over property. So San Francisco, yes, there's a elected politician in the city of San Francisco who announced that he wants to or plans to introduce legislation to ban security from being able to be armed. And I'm sure many of the listeners have probably seen the videos of the organized theft rings of where people just go into either luxury stores or Targets or just businesses with shopping carts of things that they steal, and they just walk out. Yeah. The private security don't intervene.
Commit social justice.
Correct. The private security don't intervene for all these issues that we've just been discussing because of, well, liability. And so that just empowers criminals to act with impunity.
Well, I mean, I guess I'm going to play the woke person here. Who else are they going to steal from? They got to steal from somebody. So why not? I mean, look what they did from Portland and Apple, the Apple store. They looted, robbed, destroyed the Apple store. So they put a fence up. The fence didn't work. You know, when you go, I travel around the world a lot. There are no fences at other Apple stores, at least that I've seen. They're totally.
It was only Portland.
Well, I can't say only. There may be another one that I don't know.
Well,
about.
I looked into it because I've done reporting on it.
Okay, so that comports with my experience. So what?
And it wasn't just a fence; it was a heavy-duty steel barrier. It looked like an Israeli checkpoint, and it only just so that it was on the first or second night of mass rioting in May of 2020. From that all the way until just a couple months ago this year. So for years, there's been this protective fence. Steel barrier around Portland's Apple store, Oregon's flagship Apple store, that only went down after Apple installed this bulletproof it's not glass, it's this plastic material around to replace what the former glass. And now it's in panels. So they're anticipating that if there is any destruction on any of these panels, they can just replace one small part instead of the entire glass.
I think that's the wrong solution. I think the solution is to do what REI and other businesses have done, just leave Portland. I mean, if you know, and so many businesses are leaving Portland and now San Francisco as well.
Walmart shut down in Portland.
Correct. Good. I think
a lot
it's
of
good.
the
I think we
local
should turn the
grocery
city
stores
into exactly what Wheeler and his henchmen wanted to be turned into. A vast, barren, desolate social justice paradise.
I mean, I there's something to be said about citizens experiencing the consequences of their politics.
Let's linger on that, please, because this is very important. One quick word from our sponsor for this episode. Does your paycheck stretch as far as it used to? Most likely, it does not. Here's why. It took 200 years for the United States to print its first $5 trillion. Today, Washington has done that in just 3 years. The problem, every new dollar makes each of your dollars worth less, thus robbing you and every other hardworking American of your money. But you can stop this cycle of robbery by diversifying your IRA or 401k into gold, an asset that has stood the test of time. My new sponsor, Birch Gold Group, has helped tens of thousands of Americans protect their retirement savings with physical precious metals. Now you can too. Get a free info kit on gold right now by texting the word Peter to 989898. That's PETER to 989898. Thank you very much, and I appreciate your support. If you want to continually elect people who, like Ted Wheeler, he, him, have pronouns in their bio and refuse to support law enforcement and repeatedly miscategorize and deprioritize what you should, is it Ted? I'm not a big fan of fault, but I am a fan of accountability. The citizens have to be accountable for their electoral choices. They have to be. We live in a democracy. That's the rules of the game. That's how it functions. You want to keep voting in these people? Great. Let's turn your city into a huge cesspool, which is what they're looking for. But it will be an equitable cesspool. I'll give you equity for any kind of economic flourishing.
Well, my problem with this, though, is that it's one thing if the people who, let's say that, let's just focus on Portland or Multnomah County.
Please.
It's one thing if the people of Multnomah County recognize that we effed up on the policies we support. But it's another if they don't like what they see as a result, but they don't connect it to their voting habits or the voting patterns or the policies they support.
Okay, that's not.
So they continue to advocate for it, and they may relocate to somewhere else, suburbs or other parts or different states, and still carry those same beliefs wherever they move to.
Right. There's a great book I read years ago by a man who's currently vilified, but at the time he was not. Charles Murray's What It Means to Be a Libertarian. And the argument that you just gave, he makes in that book, which is, let's say you're right that they don't make those connections and they keep voting for these lunatics who are almost intentionally destroying the city. It's still their, I don't want to say fault, but the way that you address that, that's more reason for the voters to wake up. That's not less reason for the voters to tune out. That's more reason for people to take responsibility and understand the candidates and understand the process and become educated citizens. I mean, we are continuously voting in people who are destroying the city.
You know, when I talk about this, I then get pushback from the optimistic liberals who say, well, look, it's not all bad. When Ted Wheeler ran for re-election this last time, the candidate that he was up against were too much of the far left of him, and Portland voters rejected that. We had an open communist / Antifa supporter. We had a BLM-style activist candidate.
He should have been elected. No, if you want to see how it works out, let's turn this city into one giant social experiment.
But there are more examples. Joanne Hardesty, radical,
She's a
militant
lunatic.
BLM
Right.
supporter, conspiracy theorist. She was voted out
Wonder if
by a more moderate Democrat.
She has big houses. I supported Renee Gonzalez.
My point is that perhaps then maybe there is, at least in the recent elections, evidence that the leftists in Portland are recognizing that political support for radical leftist policies is actually not a good thing. Do you think that, this is beginning of kind of a turning around?
If a moderate, I don't even like the word centrist, but if a, look, Andy, this is not complicated. I mean, truly, you have a law on the books. If you riot, we're going to arrest you. If you steal from a store, we're going to arrest you. We don't care why you're rioting. We don't care about the color of your skin. If you break the law, we're going to arrest you. And we're going to support our police officers on the streets. This is not a particularly complicated formula. In fact, all this needs to work, literally, is for everybody to do their job. But after how many days of rioting and the police were under assault, did the district attorney, and he may have turned a corner since then, that's another conversation, and the mayor actually supported the rioters. The mayor got us into the situation we're in now, and he was voted in again.
Yes, but it wasn't just him. It was city council all the way up to our two senators, our congressmen, and the governor at the time. I don't know if you remember when the federal government under President Trump surged in federal law enforcement to protect the Hatfield courthouse in downtown that was under siege for an entire month in July 2020. The response from the mayor, city council, and governor, and our two senators were Trump's secret police, Gestapo, are disappearing peaceful protesters.
We don't want them. We can handle
the media
our own
repeated
thing.
It, yes, and they also passed resolutions to ban or bar local law enforcement, Portland police, from having any cooperation with federal authorities. So yes, I've written about this extensively, about how the violence in Portland happened because it had the approval
100%
of the local government.
But wait a second now. But who's the government? We're the government. We're all the government. In a democracy, we're all the government. I'm the government. We vote in people who discharge their responsibility, or who should be discharging their responsibilities. So it seems to me so obvious. Yeah, we can blame Ted Wheeler, him. Yeah, we can blame Mike Schmidt. We can blame all these people. But ultimately, the blame comes back to the people who vote.
Yes, that is true. Mike Schmidt, when he was campaigning, had overwhelming support in Portland, and he campaigned on a message of racial equity and restorative justice. These are all euphemisms for a radical leftist agenda. And Portlanders experienced it, not just in the form of rioters being let out to riot again and again and again.
Right. And now the case with the Marine, that is a case of equity.
Yes, it's from the same worldview that
we're seeing
allows
a
that
case
to happen.
of judicial equity. And in an equitable system, blacks have been disproportionately charged with crimes, often unfairly. And if we want to remediate, or if we want to, the best way to resolve past injustices or to address them is through I think the exact quotation is, the only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. That's what equity is. So we're going to remedy past discrimination against African Americans who are disproportionately charged with crimes by doing the same thing to the ex-Marine. Now, you can disagree with that, and you're certainly welcome to, but don't say that's not equity. And don't say that the people screaming about equity from the top of their lungs are lying. They're not lying. They're doing exactly what they're telling you they're going to do. So why is everybody so surprised by this? I mean, it's just so frustrating to me because it's so obviously true that this is an agenda of equity, which is exactly what they said they're going to do in the first place. So you can accuse them of being wrong, you can accuse them of moral crime, but you cannot accuse them of being hypocrites.
True. I mean, between you and I, nobody here is accusing them of being hypocrites.
No, you're not.
Right?
And I'm saying you see wide-scale And I'll predict you're going to see an outrage among people freaking out about this. Well, you voted them in. I mean, what are people so surprised about that the Marine is being charged? Again, you can marshal a rational argument, but that rational argument about why he shouldn't be charged, in order for that argument to do any work, the person doing the prosecution would have to have a different lens of prosecution. But if your lens is equity, and that's the filter through which you make decisions, then of course there was a murder of a black man by a white man.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to invoke an equitable system that charges the Marine. The ex-Marine, excuse me.
This message of equity and social justice is extremely politically salient, though. So, as much as you and I, day in and day out, try to point out the real-life consequences of this ideology as it manifests through public safety issues, polarization, racism, hatred, violence, political
Division.
violence, etc. Still, I mean, I think a lot, it's a message that is salient to leftists and liberals. And so,
yeah, I mean, I guess the way to look
I'm a
at
bit
it
black-pilled on this. It's kind of like,
well,
I don't know. Maybe liberals, by and large, still are being fooled by the euphemisms and don't really understand what some of these words actually mean and concepts actually mean when they're used by left wings.
That's certainly true. Certainly true. So the next time, if anybody's watching this, if you're in a train and there's a lunatic threatening people, of course, it depends on your race and your trans status, and the person terrorizing the train car. But the consequence of this is so obvious that people will not intervene anymore. And when people terrorizing streetcars know that people are less likely to intervene, then they will be more likely to terrorize passengers.
There's a story out of Portland that offers actually an interesting, counter to what happened in New York. In 2017, on the TriMet Max, which is our public commuter train, at the Hollywood train station, or just getting to there was a mentally ill man who has a history of homelessness, who was making hateful statements against two black girls, and there was a young white leftist man, an Antifa supporter, who went up to him and escalated the situation. That mentally unstable man had a blade on him, and in the course of his attack, killed two other men who had intervened.
He stabbed him in the neck.
Correct. Two died. The person who originally escalated the situation by confronting the man, he was severely injured but survived. But he was lauded actually as a hero by the city of Portland. And that was interesting because that type of intervention that actually, and during the trial, by the way, the mentally ill man was, he went to trial. He was convicted and sentenced to many years for the killings that he did.
He was right. He was he was white.
But that, yes, but that instance was celebrated.
So let's talk about that for a second, because I've written about that. So in that incident, I don't remember the number of police. Do you remember what the police, how many, I know that we've lost significant number of police since George Floyd, and I know that we have a tremendous difficulty
with recruitment.
Yeah, exactly, precisely. I don't know, but it would seem to me that the thing to do in that situation is pretty obvious, and that you call 911, and that's one of the jobs of the police. There's also TriMet police. There's also a specific, and you would let them deal with that. Now people are dead, and you're correct, the individual did escalate the situation. And you never know if someone has a gun or a knife, or you never know their intentions, you never know their history. But that would seem to me to be a very good example of why we would need to not defund the police, why we would need the police in a situation in which there's a potentially violent incident going to occur. I mean, again, maybe I'm just being master of the obvious, but we're in a cultural and social situation. Here we are. It seems obvious that it's truly one of the stupidest ideas ever to defund the police, when that would be a great example of why you need police.
I mean, as stupid of a belief as it is, it's still widely popular among the radical left.
Right.
And it has particularly a lot of salience in places like Portland and Seattle and other cities that are quite hard left.
So don't you think that, and I'm not being facetious, I know you're going to think I'm being facetious when I say this, but I'm really, but don't you think we should just give them what they want? Don't you think we should give them a city in which we completely defund the police and abolish prisons, and let's see what happens? Let's run it as a social experiment. And if it turns out that they're right and that their murder rate is lower because there's no police and that it's some kind of Shangri-La, then we can try to move society toward that direction of defunding all the police.
Well, this experiment was actually kind of tried and tested with the CHAZ, the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone in Seattle in 2020. That was more than 3 weeks of a no police zone within a huge urban area, and it led to shootings, homicides, attempted rape.
Yeah, social justice. It led to social justice, sure. But I would argue as a left, I'm going to be the woke person now.
But my point is the people who advocated and supported for that didn't change their minds after they saw that it was complete horrible situation.
No, that's because it wasn't done large scale enough. It has to be the whole city of Seattle. Let's just defund the police entirely, get rid of close down all the police departments in Seattle, and let's just run it as an experiment and see what happens. I mean, why don't we give these people what they want from one city? Let's just let them have a city. We got enough cities. Let them have a city. Let's see what happens.
I mean, in some ways, you could argue that the city of Portland, we have given it to them, haven't we? In many regards.
Yeah, but we still have some police, and there's still some prisons open that we need to immediately shut down. And, we need to do it. There's only, last time I checked, there's only one traffic officer in the city of Portland currently. And that's why people do donuts and are driving like lunatics everywhere.
Yeah, so the Portland Police actually disbanded its
crime reduction task force.
They did that, and also their traffic division in early 2021. There were a number of issues. One, that division had long been accused by far left radicals in Portland, as well as the city government, of being racist because there were disparities in the pullovers and police stops. So,
can I pause you there?
Well, I just want to bring up that for more than 2 years now, the city of Portland has not had law enforcement officers dedicated to basically traffic incidents. So that's why we've had this proliferation of vehicle-related crimes, drunk driving, robberies on the streets in getaway cars, and takeaways of intersections where people do these driving stunts.
Right. I'm going to play the woke person, but Mr. No, the number of citations for traffic incidents has gone down significantly, thus proving that it is the police who cause crime.
Yeah, that is a claim they make a lot, but it's it's a lie because we have the data now on the surge in crimes in Portland as law enforcement has become less effective.
But aren't most of those crimes are, well, my understanding of most of those crimes is it's young black men committing crimes against young black men.
You're referring to the homicides and shootings.
The homicides specifically. Mm-hmm. So two things. One is that when you want to claim that police are pulling over a disproportionate number of African Americans, or the gun reduction task force has more contacts with African Americans, therefore it's racist. Matt Thornton addresses this in his book, The Gift of Violence. Nobody says because the police have more contacts with men that they have an anti-male bias.
Yes.
So the police have a disproportionate number of contacts with people who commit a disproportionate number of crimes.
Yes.
So police have an inverted relationship with people who commit fewer crimes, like Asian women.
Mm-hmm.
So the police aren't hanging out in neighborhoods with a lot of Asian women because Asian women don't commit a lot of violent homicides.
Correct.
Okay. So given that, is the best allocation of police resources to put them in neighborhoods with high numbers of Asian women?
No.
Okay. So given that, the consequence of that would be that there would be more murders among people in which the murder rate was higher in those groups. So given that, can't we say that police should have more contacts with people who are doing more crimes?
Yes.
Okay. If my reasoning is in error, let me know.
I mean, a very uncomfortable truth is in terms of the demographic makeup of people involved in violent crime, it's not equal. It's not equal in regards to the sexes. It's not equal in regards to race, and it's not equal in regards to economic strata that these suspects belong to.
And of those, the biggest disparity is male-female.
Yes, that's right.
The next, if I may, the next biggest disparity, which you did not mention, is age.
Absolutely,
people my age aren't going around as a general rule killing people.
Yes. People age out of violence as well. Yes, this is clear from the social science research and many decades of criminology. It's that was also reflected in the riot arrestee data as well. Although there was an interesting detail that arose, let's just say in Portland, since there were so many arrests here, because there were over 1,000 over many, many months. There was really disproportionate representation of people who are transgender. And I'm not aware of there being any like published academic research on this that looks at it at a more aggregate level across the
publish
US.
That data.
But it does appear that in regards to mass left-wing political violence in the US, the people who are involved in that, there's an overrepresentation of transgender, let's just say gender diverse, that's a euphemism. Overrepresentation of that demographic.
Yeah, I just want to push back on something you said. I do think, I agree, I do think it could be studied, but I don't think that the results could be published unless they showed trans people in a positive light. I just don't think a journal would pick that up because they'd be accused of being transphobic. There'd be a boycott. There'd be death threats like what happened to our mutual friend Bruce Gilley. I just don't think that study could be carried out. So speaking of which, at Portland State University, I'd like to congratulate you on your reporting. Billboard Chris and James Klug and I, is that how you say his last name, Reed?
It was actually Chelly Bufarash, who was also a witness to the incident at Portland State.
That's the Honey Badger.
Correct, Honey Badger mom, who first published the breaking news that the identity of the person who's recorded stealing the mobile phone of Billboard Chris is a Portland State academic, faculty member.
So we went. So just a little background. We went there. We were trying to have conversations, and just to be even more clear, on his billboard, so the claim isn't changing. Nobody's hiding anything. Children cannot consent to puberty blockers. That's right on his billboard. And when we went to University of Oregon or what have you, people had signs supporting trans community, we love you, etc. Well, this is not about that. I support the trans community. I support trans people. I am very much opposed to people under 18. I do not think that they can consent to puberty blockers, and we wanted to have this conversation. If you're over 18, look, you can live any kind of life you want, and society should, to the best extent possible, fully support you in any kind of decision that you want to make that doesn't hurt other people. But this is not that claim. This is something very different. This is about children, and it's about surgeries, puberty blockers, etc. And in that interview, the Portland State University professor was acting like a lunatic, driving his bike through us so he couldn't talk, screaming, singing, playing music, etc. And I want you to comment on that, and I'm going to have follow-up.
I mean, these acts are routine, and it demonstrates that because the left has a cultural dominance, they feel empowered when one of their goons engages in acts of harassment or intimidation or even violence and other criminality for that cause. And I think, because they don't face really any social stigma for their violent acts or criminal acts, it empowers other people to do it. And, just look at all the people who were engaged in the most extreme forms of violence in 2020, but because it was done for the cause of racial justice, these people are lauded as heroes. The press covers them in a certain way, uses euphemisms to describe them as well, peaceful protesters. And so there's no, often there's no legal consequences for the criminal acts, but socially there's no stigma either. So it just, in that sort of type of context, no wonder we have people who feel like they can just go up in the middle of strangers in public and follow them around and blast loud music in their ears that can be damaging to ears, to steal their property. And, there's others who take it even much further, who assault people, hit people. That's what I report about with Antifa.
Okay, so I'm going to push back on a few things, and you let me know if you think my line of reasoning is reasonable, okay?
Okay.
Okay, so you put out a tweet. I'm going to go at you a little bit now, Andy. You put out a tweet in which you accurately identified a member of the Portland State University faculty as an Antifa trainer.
Oh, yes.
And I don't remember, Reed, could you pull up that tweet, please? Do you remember the wording of the tweet?
It was 2 screenshots side by side. That one right there.
So I contacted Portland State University about an Antifa lecturer there who is touted as an expert on fascism. Alexander Reed Ross was one of the secret trainers for violent extremist gang Rose City Antifa. Leftist self-identified journalist Shane Burley was another secret trainer for RCA and leaked documents I wrote about in my book. By the way, your book was excellent.
Thank you.
Genuinely excellent.
Thank you.
It sold a lot of translations, et cetera. So I want to talk about that. So there's his web page. There he is.
That's the page on Portland State University touting its faculty who has expertise in various areas. And his profile was of him being an expert in white nationalism and fascism, even though he's
my response to that
geography
is,
professor.
This isn't a gotcha. If anything, they'll fast track him to tenure.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, so often I see you and other people put out things like this, like gotcha. This isn't a gotcha. They want the university by design wants Antifa. They are pro-Antifa. They are pro-social justice. That's their whole guiding, that's their North Star.
Well, this as I wrote it, the intention is not that this is a gotcha. It's showing another anecdote of how academics at our universities having ties with violent extremist groups. I think, this is not just about somebody who has radical leftist views. That's a First Amendment related issue. In contacting Portland State, I really wanted them to explain why they would not post or write about sort of a conflict of interest in describing somebody as a scholarly expert on this particular area.
There you go again.
Who also has associations with the violent extremist group.
There you go again.
Point. involved in acts of criminality, documented acts of criminality.
There you go again. See, your problem is that because you have integrity, you assume that they have integrity. But their goal is not to have integrity. Their goal is to support Antifa. Their goal is a radical agenda of disruption and overthrowing what a system that they consider to be a racist, patriarchal, misogynist, transphobic, heteronormative, etc. And so when you give criticisms like that, they only make sense to sane people.
That's true. And I think, I mean, the people who saw my tweet are my followers who are going to understand sort of the issues that I'm trying to highlight here. Of course, I don't think I've heard back yet as today from the communications office at Portland State.
No, you won't, but what you might see inadvertently, what you might have done is help him get promoted. No, like I'm totally serious because that's the kind of faculty they're trying to cultivate. They are a pro-Antifa, pro-radical disruptor. They don't even want their ideology. Forget about the left is broadly allergic to any self-criticism, which is why Mike Nana had trouble with his film, The Reformers, and which, as you know, the left won't have me on. The left won't have you on. They don't want to. But in this case, this is the actual explicit promotion of radical ideologies that have then been institutionalized with offices to make sure that faculty don't stray from the orthodoxies. And that's, I think, what people don't understand. And when I see these tweets, it's like, so.
All that is true, Peter, but if I could, yeah. I'm going to push back a bit.
Please.
Legacy and prestigious institutions, they may all be on board with the radicalism on the ideological, from the ideological perspective. But this is what I think. If somebody, let's say a faculty member, is then caught on camera or is shown to actually advocate clearly and cite things that are violent, then out of a reputational protection thing, the universities often do tend to offer some type of criticism of those type of statements if they come from a faculty member. I think you can think of a few examples of faculty who have advocated for killing people on the right.
Not at Portland State.
Not at Portland State, but I just mean generally in American universities and higher education.
Okay, so the difference in this, and I'm going to push back on you if that's okay. We'll push back on each other.
Yeah.
The difference, well, one of the differences in this case is the trans individual on the bike has a major oppression variable. So there's no possible way by the tenets of their own ideology that they could issue a statement or push back. So remember in the pandemic, I was brutally criticizing Portland State, and I put out a bunch of tweets, et cetera, about why isn't Portland State criticizing the beating of Jewish people? Nothing. There's not a peep about it. Well, they can't do that because that's not within the ideology doesn't make way for that. In the same way that the trans student we're watching right there, and we can put inserts of it in the video, who's behaving like a lunatic, who's faculty at Portland State, they can't do it. And if I'm wrong, look, you know how you can tell if I'm wrong? They will issue a statement repudiating or saying this, or they will fire him or what have you, but they won't.
If there's significant media attention, I suspect that they will respond.
You want to bet? You want to bet they won't do anything? I bet you dinner.
Okay. But I think as of right now, it's really been only conservative media, conservative social media that has made an issue out of this. Certainly, the Oregonian, I'm positive, won't write about what happened. And so, I mean, this often happens with institutions is that if it's just right-wing outrage, conservative outrage, they'll just write it out. It goes away. People forget pretty quickly. But I mean, and that's, this brings up a whole nother issue of like what happens when you have a really unhealthy media landscape in Portland. In my opinion, I think the media landscape here is very unhealthy because all the press is at best liberal, at worst hard left, far left, and I would argue operates more as sort of a propaganda type role. I would
completely
accuse
agree.
Portland Mercury of being like that. But collectively, all these publications will ignore. Then it's only me and conservative media who's reaching out to the PR office asking them for comment, and that's easy to ignore.
And then the idea is that then they characterize you as being on the far right, right? They characterize you, but that's the thing that I want to punch home to you right now, or attempt to punch. It was just squirrel jump. Did you see that? That's the thing that I want to attempt to punch home to you, is that people still have the vestige, and I really hope that I can articulate this clearly to you, that the media's job is to uncover the truth or to report on the news as it happens, all the news that's fit to print, quote unquote, or that the institutions still care about what's true, or they'll criticize you and me, but me more so for this, saying that, look, this is not the goal of the institution. The goal of the institution is not to create educated citizens or to prepare them for a job. The goal is to introduce them and make them true believers in an ideology. That's the goal. But it's such a distasteful idea to most people. They just don't want to believe it. They believe, well, that's some core. I can't believe the whole thing is like the whole system can't be geared. No, the whole system is geared for that. And so that's why those kids get out of colleges and universities and they go to the Oregonian. They go to these papers. And they've been force-fed and they've come to be believers of the ideology. And if they're not, they don't want to rock the boat because they want their careers.
Yep. Yeah, that pipeline to radicalization that happens in universities and increasingly in high schools and even middle schools and sometimes elementary schools as well. I think that's been a really disturbing development. It seemed with children, like elementary schools, middle schools, they seem to generally, I noticed in the US before George Floyd, they would introduce these concepts, but it would be pretty subtle. But it seemed like the floodgates were just open after George Floyd died, that you could actually be very radical and even advocate for actually quite militant means. I mean, there's Project Veritas has caught some of these teachers on camera, secret recordings doing such things. It's in my view, the left has captured the education beyond higher education.
They've succeeded winning.
I mean, and that's how you build up the current and next generation of foot soldiers.
Yeah, I'd say the woke left, to be more specific. The woke left are at the core of this.
That seems like a losing battle then for those who want to oppose, because you can look analogy that you can bring that I can bring up is I used to write about radical Islam a lot. I got a lot of hate for that back then too. And you look at places decades ago who had a culture of secularism and how Islamism, by that I'm referring to political Islam, was really able to transform society. Really, how the Islamists were able to do it was to infiltrate within education and to capture education. And so, you bring up the next generation who have just kind of been brainwashed in a certain particular worldview of how society should be oriented. And it's, you don't even necessarily have to have a revolution in government or regime change. You have just, with time, the norms of society shifting completely to where, I can think of Egypt, for example. You look back decades ago, women didn't wear head coverings at all. Now more than 90% do. And this was just done through incremental changes at the social level, particularly through universities and then just education generally. And people adopted those changes themselves. So,
do you think, listening to you speak, do you think that one of the reasons, okay, so let me give you the precursor. You're doing work that nobody else is doing, which is unbelievably brave, and people will come. It's totally true. People will say to me, like, "This is unbelievable." He's reporting on things that everybody should be reporting on, but nobody is reporting on, and the unbelievable vitriol that they give you, the just incredible nastiness and attack. And I'm wondering how much of that is due to the fact that you're gay and they look at you as some kind of a traitor. Like, gay people should believe whatever they think gay people it's like a monolith.
Yeah, and also being a person of color. Yeah, I think there is like a. I mean, I've never been another race or another gender, so I can't compare, obviously. But it seems to me there's more of an intensity of hatred against me beyond just the criticisms of my views and my work, because of the fact that I do have these other variables about my identity that are a bit inconvenient to the woke left. And so the hatred is intensified because it's not just that I have the wrong views or that I'm maybe working against their goals or exposing them, but that I'm like a traitor.
A traitor, that's right.
Yeah,
that's right.
Often the message that I get from those who hate me and hate my work is that the Nazis will kill me too after I've put them in, helped empower them and get them into positions of power, which is really, I mean, that's an insane position. But these people do really think that.
Yeah, it's because they believe everybody's a Nazi.
Yes,
literally everybody's a Nazi.
That's basically the ideology of Antifa, in that anybody who is somehow an opponent to their agenda or MO ideology is a fascist. I mean, it's in the name, right? If you're not supportive of anti-fascism, you're supportive of fascism. It goes back again to euphemisms and destruction of language and deception. It's deception.
It's like a critique of pure tolerance. So you're in the piece by the same name. So people on the left despise you, and they really despise you to the extent of going to your house, hunting you. There's a famous video, over 1 million views, of a guy who happened to be Asian, who had a mask on they thought was you, and they were terrorizing this poor guy.
Yeah, that was outside the Portland Police Association building, the former one. They had to move because it was attacked so much in North Portland in 2020. The building was set on fire repeatedly, and there was this man walking by who vaguely looks like me. He's East Asian, has similar build, and he's masked. And he said he's not Andy, but they were calling him a liar. And I mean, I'm just thankful he wasn't physically assaulted. There was a journalist last year who has contributed to Daily Beast and others who said that he confronted me at a bar in New Orleans. I wasn't even in the U.S. at the time. Do you remember this?
Yeah, I do remember it.
Yeah, and it's so, yeah, with these woke.
But again, there you go again. So you're operating in a position of truth. These people couldn't possibly care less about truth. Truth is something disposable that you can use or not to achieve social justice, to achieve equity. And so many people are just locked in this idea of either a gotcha or it's not true. Well, they don't care about what's true. Why do they care about what's true? They just want to achieve, they will use truth as an instrument or not, or smearing or what have you, to achieve a very specific endpoint.
Yes, through any means necessary. Yes, right. Absolutely. You're right. Truth doesn't matter. In fact, lying,
correct,
and misinformation and disinformation are actually core strategies of how they try to achieve their goal.
Right. So that's why I've been criticized for wanting to have conversations with these people, because from the trans activist that of the story that you just did at Portland State with Billboard Chris, that he was very specific, and when the people came, the social workers came down the roof. They were very explicit, they were very honest. We want to, well, at least at this part, our goal is to disrupt. They want to disrupt. They're not interested in conversations. They're not interested in truth. They're interested in furthering a very specific agenda that they have. And so many people get caught in this idea of, oh, I wasn't even in New Orleans. Well, this guy he couldn't possibly care less if that was you in New Orleans. His point is to smear and damage reputationally and undermine you and do whatever he can to advance his agenda. And I think the sooner people understand that, it's helpful to understand what someone's motives actually are.
Yeah, and my frustration with liberals who are on side of people like you and I is that a lot of them still have this hesitation of being seen as associated or too warm and open to people on the right, because they still want, I don't know, liberal credentials and be seen as like respectable. And it's like, how do you...
Guilt by association.
Correct. They're really afraid of that. And I just wonder how they expect, how could we even win any of these battles if it's like the rules of the games is completely thrown out the window, as you just mentioned, that lying is a tactic used by the other side in disinformation,
and it's an association fallacy. And so then the other thing is look, if Fred doesn't want to speak to you, Fred shouldn't have to speak to you. If Fred wants to speak to you and you want to speak to Fred, you should be able to speak to Fred. The problem is that there is this associative fallacy in which people say, oh, Fred spoke to Andy Ngo, so by proxy, Fred is, a Nazi, whatever they deranged claim they want to say. So therefore, we have to punish Fred.
Yeah, but I mean, what I'm specifically referencing is I'm sure you get the emails and DMs from people who reach out off the record and make it very clear that they're reaching out like completely in private to express support for the work that you're doing, but they would never ever show that publicly. And when I get messages like that, I mean, I guess I appreciate it, but at the same time, I have a certain resentment that they're cowardly, because it's like, look, I understand that you have something that you could lose by speaking out for your principles, but we're in this position because there are a lot of people like you who are afraid of pushback. And so, yeah,
Reed and I have been to, you just go all over the world, and we interviewed Charles Nagy, a professor of psychology at UCF, and boy, what they did to him was ghastly. He's gay, left-leaning, a very, very reasonable person. I don't know. Have we put those videos out yet, Reed? I don't think so. It's out. The video is out. Yeah, the video is out. We put those videos out. Yeah, that's right. And we had a woman at the end who organized a mob. So if you toe the party line,
This is a phenomenon where left-wing people can fail upwards.
Explain.
Well, I see particularly in journalism, journalists who are accused of, let's say, plagiarism or just doing crap work, getting promoted and going to bigger and bigger publications. You see that in academia too, I think. And so it's a privilege that they have. It's kind of, they can F up really, really badly and still...
Kevin Cruz, that's his name. Kevin Cruz, accused of plagiarism in Cornell dissertation. So I know you don't swim in the academic pool directly, but I will tell you for a fact, plagiarism is, if there's any such a thing as a sin in academia, it would be plagiarism. And again, all it takes is for you to just cite something. It's and mistakes are made. Everybody makes some mistakes. Sometimes you copy text or whatever, but we're talking actual plagiarism. But anyway, okay, so let's go on to a few other things. One of the things I love about your Twitter feed is all these crazy videos. Where do you find all these videos? How do you get all these crazy videos?
A lot of times it's people sending me things, and they're afraid of having their name publicly attached to it. They may just be an observer of some type of incident that happens in public. So they'll send it to me and I'll publish it and I'll keep them anonymous. A lot of times it's me just being a good internet sleuth, is that the word?
Yeah.
And finding out videos that are posted by other people on Twitter and just retweeting them and bringing attention to a larger audience. I do that to a lot of videos that left-wing radicals record, and that's the one thing that really infuriates them. A lot of the Antifa in Portland, they would record videos of the riots and then frame it in a particular way. Let's say they're accusing police of being the rioters, but the video shows something else. I'll retweet it, and then they'll end up deleting the video because they don't like the videos showing what they do, or that the video shows incriminating evidence against their comrades.
That reminds me of something. So people have sent me some hate mail about you. And one of the things that they've said to me is that I am responsible for radicalizing you because we have a long history. You were a student at PSU when I was there. You put together some of my events, and somehow they believe. So have I radicalized you in some kind of way that I should be aware of?
You haven't radicalized me, but you supported me in, I should say, you inspired me to be brave. So I'm thankful to you for that. Because I saw that when you were at Portland State, you were quite vocal about your various criticisms of things that you speak out now. And that, for me, at PSU was hugely inspiring. That it showed me, look, I can still, because at that time I was at the Portland State student newspaper. I thought, look, I can write about things that maybe some of my colleagues in the newsroom won't like. But I'm going to do it anyways. I think, at that time I had a naive view that I could be, a force for change from within. I was forced out of the student newspaper ultimately, and this was a long time ago. But you you didn't radicalize me. You inspired me.
Thank you. That it genuinely means a lot to me. And I'm overwhelmed and overjoyed and absolutely delighted by our success. And I hope it keeps going. I am sorry for, I know you don't do street reporting anymore. When did you stop doing street reporting, by the way?
I stopped doing live street reporting, video street reporting on after my really severe beating in June of 2019.
And I saw you in the hospital. I came to see you then.
You did. You were one of the few who went to see me.
And then what do people say? I remember what people say, oh, he didn't get it. And I'm like, the doctor is 5 feet away from me? It's like, yep, we've got brain bleed. I'm literally standing in the same room listening to the doctor. And all these people who weren't even there are claiming it was a fraud. And I'm like, wow, so disassociated from reality. You will say anything. But that's what gets back. It's not about the truth. It's about furthering the narrative. It's about slandering and smearing and reputational assaults. But it's not about what's true.
Yes, the rules are thrown out the window. The rules of the game are thrown out the window. And the goal is, according to them, to win by any means necessary.
Right.
So you're referring to really disgusting smears, viral smears online that I had faked my injuries to try to promote a GoFundMe. Right. Horrible.
Just pathological lies.
Well, the BuzzFeed news reporter who was on the ground in Portland, who was actually with me in the hospital for a bit, who witnessed the attacks, Joseph Bernstein, when he was writing his story about the attack, he asked me to produce my medical documentation evidence about the brain bleeding because he himself was, I guess, apparently a bit skeptical because of all these rumors online. I provided it, and he cited that in his reporting. But it was just like, wow, would you ask any other victim of violent assault to show documentation of the injuries?
Well, it was interesting because when the doctor said you had brain bleeding, and I'm in the room, and you tweeted something, and I responded, I don't even know how many he did not get brain bleeding. I'm like, what are you talking about? But that was before I truly grokked the idea that truth is but an instrument, or lying, or mendacity. It is a ultimate form of consequentialism. It is an ultimate kind of only the outcome matters. Everything else can be disposed of, and truth is at the top of that list.
Yeah, that's right. I thought I was relatively understanding of the media landscape at that time, but I had so much to learn. I was really shocked that in the really in the immediate days and weeks after my beating, because that in June 2019, that kind of was how a lot of people first heard of me, because the assault was partially caught on video, and then after the punches and kicks and hits to my head, all the extremists, the Antifa, threw these shakes over me. So these viral pictures of me bleeding and drenched head to toe in this white liquid. That went viral. A lot of people heard of me from there. And then I was shocked that the response from the local and even the national press was really to smear me, frame me as a provocateur, that I somehow brought this upon myself.
Because they participate in the ideology and they're not reporting, they're forwarding narratives, right? That's the goal. So I listen to, I try to listen to media whenever I can. I listened to a BBC, it was either yesterday, was it yesterday or 2 days ago? I can't remember, but 2 days ago. And they were doing a report on former President Trump's hearing. And they brought in, they said, we have a reporter, we're bringing a reporter to talk about, I can't remember the person's name, from Slate. And I thought to myself, really? Like, from Slate? Like, you choose, I mean, Salon would have probably been slightly worse, but just as, in the same category of deranged. You're choosing the most far left possible venue you could choose, as opposed to having not even a centrist, but someone, not left wing, not right wing, someone with no wings. Yeah, just somebody who just accurately reports what's going on. Like, you had to choose the most far left. So either they don't know because they don't understand the media landscape here, in which I would argue that they should have understood because they're reporting on a story. So why would you go with someone from Slate or The Guardian or what have you or if you want to have someone from Slate on, that's fine. You have someone from Slate, but then have someone on the other side so that you have some kind of a balance, and then you can let your audience decide. But what I saw happening then with the coverage of you, it was just an assault on you as opposed to the people who actually assaulted you.
Yeah, that was particularly, I'm a pretty sensitive person, Peter, and it was, I lost friendships over that. There were a lot of people who...
They were never your friends to begin with.
I know that, but it was still really painful because it was like they were... I don't know if they necessarily believed a lot of the stories that came out, but they just thought maybe where there's smoke, there might be fire, and it's too complicated to dig in. I really appreciate, to this day, it was Robbie Suave at Reason Magazine.
He's great. He's terrific.
Who investigated these claims that I was party to a violent right-wing attack on Antifa, which is complete bogus.
It's insane. It's completely insane.
He investigated the videos and the narratives that were put out and concluded that there was actually no evidence for this. But yet, that's not the facts that people remember. They remember the headlines from Slate and Vox and Daily Beast.
Right. Vox
and Portland Mercury.
Right. Portland Mercury is right up there, yeah.
And yeah.
Okay, I just want to ask you a few more questions, and then we'll wrap it up. You've been generous with your time, and I appreciate it. How are you doing with all this? You had to leave Portland because of these lunatics. You went to the UK. How are you doing with everything that's been going on with you, both the good and the bad?
It's it's painful to not be in around my family as much as before becoming a public figure. I think there's a certain risk that my family has to live with because of their association with me, and that's difficult. And sometimes, it's hard to feel encouraged to continue to report on the same beats when you're fighting such an uphill battle with larger publications and institutions that are really able to kind of put out misinformation with impunity and get that misinformation amplified to the congressional level, for example. All that can feel discouraging at times. But then, one thing that I try to remind myself is to be grateful for what I do have. And what I do have is a large following of people who support my work. People like you in my life who are friends, but also who are also doing great things in themselves. And so, like, I have a lot to be thankful for. Yes, it came at, a lot of it came at a heavy cost. But being brave isn't bravery if it was easy, right?
Yeah, I wonder sometimes if you still have a glimmer of hope in that you believe that people who have explicitly and knowingly wronged you know at some level that what they've done is wrong.
I want to believe that. I'm not a religious person anymore now, but there was a period in my life where I was a very devout Christian, and I think one of the things that I still hold on from that period in my past is that just the inherent worth of every human being and human life. And so I think people who really despise me to the point where they would like to see me dead are those who dehumanize their opponents and view them as subhuman and scum and not worthy of life. I try to remind myself that these people, at the end of the day, have dignity just by the fact that they are human. And so I hope that for all the violent criminals who have done me wrong, that someday they don't have to apologize to me, but maybe live their lives in a way that is loving to other people around them. And particularly loving of people who are hard to love.
Yeah, it shows me how dangerous the ideology is and how divisive it is and how it causes people to hate other people. And it also shows me that at base, these are people who are, I mean, it's just so plain to me. Like, they don't have a knowledge of history. And they want to erect Chaz. Like, that's the model that you like, that's what you want to bring. They haven't done the intellectual work. They have an ideology that doesn't value, or that actively, consciously devalues and fights against conversation and discourse. So it's mimetically, it's the way that it hermetically seals the ideology so it doesn't have to deal with any potential breaches, so that it can stay coherent with each other, and it can kind of make people think that they're a better person because they participate in the ideology. And the damage that this does, and similar to religion, you mentioned religion, one of the things that was always interesting to me is when you looked at the testimonies of people who abandoned their faith or who escaped their faith, particularly in the more and Travis Brown, Travis Brown, one of the people who works for me, does the woke Reformation. He was raised in a Christian cult. And when you look at the testimonies of these people, and I've interviewed them over the last few months, the sense of moral worth and purpose they get, for example, in your case, of wanting to kill you, the sense of self-justification, them thinking they're a good person doing good things in the world by wanting to murder you. That is so crazy. That is so deranged that it's difficult to explain to people. There are so many moving parts of this that it's difficult for people. But here's a key lesson that I learned, again, going back to the religious thing. One of the lessons that I've learned is if I say, listen, this guy believes in a talking snake, people will say, he doesn't really believe in a talking snake. But if we get someone who believes in a talking snake saying, yes, I believe in a talking snake, people say, oh, well, geez, maybe the guy does believe in a talking snake. But for you, if people hear me say, or you say, there are people who want to kill me, people say, no one really wants to kill a guy. But you have, I don't even know, hundreds of people clamoring for your death. But it's so crazy to hear, and for what? But it's so crazy to they're incredulous when they hear us say it. But that's why it's so important to turn the camera on these people and have them say it. And say, like, look at what this does to people. This makes them horrible. Christopher Hitchens used to say that religion will make people do pretty nasty things that they wouldn't do absent religion. Well, this can be looked at as a kind of religion. But It's not a benevolent Christianity. It's a wickedness.
Yeah, and it looks like the next sort of battlefront for them, the radical left is all coalescing around the trans militancy.
Right.
Bringing this back to Antifa, they're only really able to mobilize in opposition to something. It was very easy to do when Trump was in office for 4 years because they also had the entire national press talking about how the federal government was a fascist regime. With that, with Trump out of office, now they're really, they organize around the trans and the drag stuff. And I'm concerned about the really open incitement of violence by some of these trans activists. You see the type of signs that they bring, the shirts and messaging. Right. It's about trans rights or else. And then there's images of firearms, protect trans kids, and there's a knife, and treating the Nashville Christian school shooter, the trans shooter, as a martyr of some sorts as well, and also as a victim of society.
Steve Weinberg's, for good people to do bad things, that takes religion. For these people to behave in such a way, they need an ideology that convinces them they're a better person because they've done X, Y, or Z.
I have a question for you. You worked many, many years in new atheism and secular activism, challenging the theological claims of Christianity. I wonder if you feel like you take any responsibility for the rise of these sort of new political pseudo-religions that have fundamentalism, extremism, but there's no grace element in it. There's no salvation element. There's no element of actually loving your enemies. Do you feel like maybe
that's a really interesting question?
I don't mean to make it personal.
No, you can make it personal. You can ask me literally anything you want. I'll tell you the truth. I'm trying to think, is that true about everything? Probably. I'm trying to think if you could probably ask me some weird question that even then I wouldn't lie to you. I'd just tell you I don't want to answer it. I was probably thinking, but I can't imagine what that would be. But I just did a interview with our mutual friend, Winston Marshall, who is fantastic. And it was on The Spectator. And I was surprised it has almost 300,000 views, but he asked me basically the same question. And I will say I really like him. He's fantastic.
Great person.
I'm going to London in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be staying with him for a month, which is a long time. So I'm going to put me up. So I'm going to be a good house guest. But anyway, so did I? So I will admit to a kind of Pollyanna view that.
What's Pollyanna?
Just overly optimistic view, that overly optimistic to the point of being ridiculously over optimistic. That if we could just defeat some of these things, then these beliefs, then it would open up a kind of new age of flourishing or a new age of enlightenment. I absolutely, positively, and I saw some canaries in the coal mine with the skeptic movement where skeptics and atheists were adopting religion. Now, if you would ask me that, Russell Blackford has written about that pretty extensively, the Australian philosopher who's dual doctorates. But if you ask people, if you had asked me years ago, is atheism a religion? I would have said, no, that's just stupid. But people have become religious atheists. And with that, they have adopted that. I like the idea of thinking about an atheist as just a non-stamp collector. do I look at myself as somewhat responsible? I do. I will admit I didn't see it coming. I certainly didn't see it coming to the extent that it has dominated society. And I think without any question whatsoever, and I've spoken to many people about this, we are far, far better off with a society that has a benevolent form of Christianity than we are with a society that has adopted the fundamental tenets of wokeism or critical social justice. There's just no question about it.
Did you underestimate the importance of religious worldviews just in humans, just as through a evolutionary reality? Like, because I was involved in secular activism for many years as well. That's how I got to know you knew of you more than a decade ago. And at that time, I was naive and thinking, oh, if people, turn away from, let's say, Christianity or Islam, Judaism, whatever, Buddhism, they'll just adopt rational, critical thinking skills and would be a much better society for it. And I completely was ignorant about how, in my opinion now today, humans as a species need religion, and it's going to manifest itself in either, traditional organized religion or other forms that take on aspects of religion, regardless.
Yeah, Brett has that famous thing, why beliefs are literally false but metaphorically true, our mutual friend Brett. And I think Heather has written a little bit about that as well. So do I think that I think I do play a role. I don't know what I could have done differently in terms of. So that's the other thing that's interesting to me about this cultural moment. The tools are the same, but the methods of engagement are different. Like, what's the evidence? How do we weigh evidence? How likely is it that someone walked on water? I mean, the tools are pretty much the same for any of these claims about, actually, these claims are even more ludicrous. I think I put out a tweet. We went from pretending to know, thousands of years we pretended to know something we don't know. Now we're pretending not to know something we know, specifically about the men and women's sports, the trans issues. And again, as I have to say, every time I support trans rights, if someone wants to transition when they're 18, that's their business. Society should treat them as totally reasonable human beings.
Do you think 18 is, one could argue, it's just an arbitrary line that people have adopted as
I get a lot of
age and majority.
I get a lot of pushback for the 18. So let's explore this for a second. So I think we have to. Everyone's talking about a national divorce now. I think we have to compromise with people. We should allow abortion in the first trimester, and only in the most extraordinary cases after the first trimester. I think it's a compromise. I think that no puberty blockers or any kind of medical intervention whatsoever to people under 18. But the price for that is we have to let people who are 18 mutilate their genitals. I mean, I think it's a reasonable compromise. Now, will there be issues of detransitioners at 18 upset the society? Sure. But I think that if we adopt that posture of we have to give something, we have to give, and I also think that people have to be responsible for their choices. They have to be held accountable. Just like I said in the who we vote for in democracy, people have to be, and people have a right to have sovereignty over their own bodies. So if you can go to war at 18, I think you can buy a gun at 18. I don't think you can buy alcohol at 18. If you can get a tattoo at 18. And the other thing is, it's just logistically not feasible. I mean, is everybody who's thinking about transitioning, are we supposed to give a police officer there to make sure that, I mean, it's just not feasible if someone wants to do self-harm. So I think 18 is a very reasonable compromise between, it's the line, is it arbitrary? Yeah, but it's the line between children and adults.
Do you use people's preferred pronouns?
I do. I always do. I use Buck Angel. He's become a friend of mine. I use Deidre McCluskey's. She's affiliated with the University of Austin now.
But these are people who are sympathetic to our cause. I'm talking, what about those radical
I do.
leftists who have gone after you. And
I do. But with exceptions, though, I do. I refuse to use neo pronouns. I refuse to use anything related to neo. I refuse to bastardize the language, so I won't do them, they. But I will do he, she for non-natal women or men. Yeah, I honestly don't have a problem with it. But I know that people, Posey Parker and others, have said that if you do that, you're opening a gate, for example, for a man in a woman's room, but no, I don't have.
you cede ground to them, I think is what she argues.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I just consider it to be a kind of a politeness. I don't.
But why not use it for they, them then?
Because that changes the language. Because you're
yes,
asking
but you
people
could also
to do
argue that
different.
using the pronouns of somebody who's not actually female or male, whatever, then that is also changing the language.
There's no grammatical mistake there, but there's a grammatical mistake. The other thing is when you speak to someone, you never really use their pronouns. I've never said he to you once in this interview, this conversation.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I mean, I asked just because this issue comes a lot for me as a journalist, as a writer. I get a lot of criticism from my followings because I do use the preferred pronouns, although I don't use the neo pronouns, but that's pretty rare anyways. But it's a frustrating thing as a writer because then it becomes confusing. Also, sometimes in the reporting, particularly if I'm doing the non-binary stuff. But for me, I guess defend the usage of the preferred pronouns in the writings because it's a matter, I think, of consistency. I know for a lot of people on the right, they have no issue with using the preferred pronouns for people who trans people who pass and who they're sympathetic to. Thinking of people like Blair White and others.
I was just at a party with Blair White at Michael Malice's house in Austin, and I use when talking to her, she, her. I have no problem with that, passing or not, but she was certainly passing.
Correct.
But
yeah, my point is just, so for me, I've just adopted, just for a matter of consistency, people's preferred pronouns, because I don't think it's a good metric that you use the preferred pronouns only if you think that person could actually pass.
It's not. The other thing is, the accusation is that if you do that, you participate in their delusion.
Yes.
I would much rather just have a reasonable relationship with people that's not antagonistic from the get-go. And I think that's a difference, and again, it's just fresh in my mind because I did this with Billboard Chris. That's the difference between Billboard Chris and myself. He's much more kind of in your face while being super calm. And I have much more of the street epistemology approach. I'm not saying one is better. It's like, Penn and Jillette and bring back to atheism. I think that the tent is big enough where we can have, and anybody can use the pronouns or not use the pronouns. I'm not going to tell you when they should or shouldn't. I can think of very rare exceptions. Like, I guess if someone were to militantly demand it of me, I wouldn't do it. But if someone were to ask nicely, hey, I go by this. But I will also say I'm not unsympathetic to the passing, because I have had people who looked exactly like a man with a beard, etc., and they told me their pronouns were she and vice versa. Mm-hmm. And it's been a little, maybe it's just my age, I've just been a little jarred by that.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to throw out, toss out?
The American pundits on the right have really focused a lot of time on Dylan Mulvaney.
Yeah.
I've avoided talking about this social media influencer, but I've been asked about this individual in interviews. I wonder if you think it's particularly helpful to the cause, I guess, fighting trans ideology, to discuss this person so much.
I think I try to avoid all conversation and talk about Dylan Mulvaney. I don't think about Dylan Mulvaney. I don't care about Dylan Mulvaney. I do not think that Dylan Mulvaney poses the threat that most of the right poses. I think and it'd be interesting to see if the boycott works. I don't think Bud is going to apologize. Bud Light. I don't think the CEO is going to apologize, Anheuser-Busch. But we'll see what happens. But I don't think that Dylan Mulvaney poses the threat. I can't believe I even said Dylan Mulvaney's name. Poses the threat that people think he does.
Yeah, I guess I just bring it up because there's a frustration I have with those on the right in the culture wars who really, in my view, waste a lot of time on really going after essentially nonsense when there's things we need focus on.
Right. I've often said that that's the failure to morally triage inflation, the looming banking crisis, liquidity, which is leading to inflation, homelessness, which Schellenberger's written about, crime on the subways, the Ukrainian war, which we've gained, that's become unfortunately polarized. Our mutual friend Douglas Murray has some great stuff on that, by the way, if you haven't read that. The looming problems with China and Taiwan. We have the fentanyl problem, the drug addiction problem. We mentioned homelessness. So we have actual problems. And talking about an ad representative, or even talking about a drag show, a drag queen story hour, I think is unfortunate. But again, it's this idea that many on the right and on the left have bartered, well, mostly the left, but certainly not exclusively the left, have bartered class concerns for identity concerns. So they're no longer talking about wage disparities, income disparities, class disparities, whereas the fact of the matter is the vast majority of Americans, virtually everybody, is far more comfortable having a friend who's in a different race than they are in a different social class. I mean, find me a single person who would disagree with that. So I think that we have we've been misprioritizing, and we've been thinking about and caring about the wrong issues for too long.
At the same time, I'm very sympathetic to focusing on cultural war issues, just because I think, let's say going back some years, I think a lot of people on the right were kind of just asleep at the wheel and let radical leftists, or woke, or whatever you want to call them, kind of just take over culture. And then when people were kind of recognizing something's wrong here, it's like basically too late in a way. And so, I don't know. Maybe my criticism of...
Yeah. No, that's because I would argue that's because they themselves have been concerned about the wrong thing. They've been, I remember when I was a kid, they were concerned about banning Dungeons and Dragons. They're just concerned about anti-gay stuff. They've just been concerned about things they're just totally untethered to reality. And the consequence of that silliness that took over the party for so long.
But Peter, one could argue that the people on, let's say, the Christian right in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, their concerns about the slippery slope of normalizing gay and lesbian relationships in let's say gay marriage, that would open the floodgates for other degeneracy. This is their words. That's what they allege. Would you then see that with what we're seeing today, that in some ways they may have been vindicated?
No, I don't. No, I think that is...
I'm asking you as a gay man, and that's the irony here.
No, I don't think that that's true. And, both of my kids are gay, right? So I think that did nothing but delegitimize their position and make people think that they're a bunch of crazy people. Or a bunch of people who are not decent and compassionate.
I mean, you can sort of you can draw kind of a logical, consistent thread between the arguments for the people who are supportive of gay and lesbian rights to the people who want to trans children today. It's love is love, be who you are, and we should be accepting of people who are different.
Right. So I would argue that that's just a failure to nuance positions, and it's a failure to understand the difference between a consenting adult and somebody who their prefrontal cortex is not sufficiently developed so that they can make judgments about, well, as Abigail Schreier says, something that will do irreversible damage to themselves. They're just not. Well, that's the other thing. As my son mentioned to me, let's say that someone thinks they're gay and they're wrong. So what? They literally, so what? But if someone thinks they're trans and they're wrong, and they get hormones and Lupron and surgeries, the so what is epic. The so what becomes irreversible. And in What's Our Problem, Tim Urban's new book, he talks about that. What chapter does that read? It's chapter 5. Yeah. So I often wonder if a lot of this stuff is just people seeking drama. They just want, like the trans guy on the bike, they just want drama. The people, when we went down to Eugene, so it's literally written on his billboard. It's literally has a billboard on him that says, no, children cannot consent to puberty blockers. And these people are bringing out signs that say, we love trans people, we support, by the administration, who had no business whatsoever being involved in that event. Like none. That should not be what they're doing. And by the way, just got back from Austin, from the University of Austin. We had a long talk about what the faculty does, et cetera. And they are doing something super interesting. University of Austin, I'm a founding faculty fellow, new institution, new university that's been created. I find this fascinating. One of the things that they're going to do is they're going to separate the administration from the faculty and the students. Administration, I don't think virtually no administrators, as far as I understand it, will be on campus. So that wouldn't even have been possible to change the discourse like that. But at that level, you're not even capable of understanding a claim. Like, you have literally drilled out of people, the ideology has consumed their cognitions and their epistemology. So they can't look at the claim and evaluate the claim. And what they're doing is, like at Portland State, don't talk, we have coloring books here, we have cotton candy, you can come to these safe places. But if you had been teaching people from day one how to make an argument, how to respond to an argument, how to evaluate evidence, you wouldn't need to do any of that stuff. But that's not their purpose. That's Jonathan Haidt's, the difference between the telos between a truth-seeking university and a social justice university. Their point isn't to develop people who can substantively engage ideas and formulate criticisms. They have institutionally engendered a kind of epistemic and emotional fragility in people. And we see the consequence of that now. Anything else on your mind?
We got through it all.
Yeah, I want to thank you again I think you are the bravest person out there. I truly, truly believe that you are doing work that everyone else, almost without exception, is too cowardly to do. I think that the world is better off, and if someone has a problem with you, they should rebut you with reason, evidence, and argument. But again, the reason that you don't see that is because reason, evidence, and argument are either discredited as tools of the patriarchy or white supremacy, or they won't do the work necessary to rebut the claims that you have for a number of reasons. First of all, the other thing I found in this ideology, people who participate in it, they tend to be intellectually lazy. That's what happens when you live in a system that validates the opinions you have. So you don't get a resistance, an active resistance of somebody. And if you do that for long enough, you decrease your ability to engage. You don't just decrease your ability to engage ideas, but you decrease the emotional resilience that you have to understand an idea that runs counter to a worldview that you have in the first place. So there's this interlocking system of almost a kind of epistemic paralyzation in which people engage. It's like they're taking knives instead of like whacking your spinal column, you're whacking your epistemic system with some kind of a cudgel until you become a epistemic paraplegic and you can't even gauge anything. You can't even move anymore. You're not even, it's beyond the point of fragility. And that's what we see on college campuses when Reed and I go around.
They respond with the screaming, the crying. And actually, I find, my response to that, at least they're responding that way, because quite often what I have witnessed and experienced is that people responding with outbursts of violence.
Yeah. So, but you do understand they have to do that, right? They have
to protect their own beliefs.
Well, yeah, because if they because the beliefs, the evidence they have for their beliefs are not commensurate.
It's evidence.
The evidence they have are incommensurate to the confidence they have in the belief. So when you go around and we go around the world and we ask people about things, you wouldn't need to be offended. You just present the evidence. It's literally that simple. But they don't have the evidence because they don't know what the other side of the argument is, but because they've been living in echo chambers in which they're taught by ideologues to believe certain facts, quote unquote, facts about the world or certain truths. But again, when you haven't been trained to see the other side of an issue, or even to know what it is, then you have to respond somehow. I'm offended, F you, physically assaulting someone. But I will say, what's interesting, Reed and I were in Australia for a month. We're in Puerto Rico for a month. We're going to London for a month. Hope we can hang out over there. And what I will say is, once you leave college campuses in the United States, correct me if I'm wrong, Reed, was there a single instance of somebody who became offended and acted like a college student on these campuses that we found? Probably not all with it. 2 months of doing this in Hungary and Romania, nothing, nobody. You find this craziness, this open hostility to conversation, discourse, and dialogue, the critical social justice ideology. You find this uniquely, in my experience, and I'll tell you how it is in London next time we go when we go to other places in the Anglosphere, uniquely on college campuses in America and in America.
Yes, I would agree with that. In my travels between the times that I spent in the UK, in Europe, absolutely. It's actually really, when I talk to, let's say, anti-woke activists or pundits in the UK, a lot of them, they despair. They say, oh, things are so bad here. I tell them, it's not. It's for example, somebody doing like what Billboard Chris did, doing that in the UK, you're not going to likely expect violence, whereas doing it here, it is. There were reasons why you guys didn't pre-announce when and where you would be,
right, exactly,
for that reason.
Exactly.
You're not facing that. I mean, obviously there are some assumptions where somebody may throw something in the UK.
What if in the UK you had a billboard saying there is no God, and you went into a Muslim neighborhood?
Oh, you're bringing up now, okay, that's a bit different now, because then in some of these areas, parallel societies, they do operate on a different...
Parallel court. I know they have parallel court systems.
For arbitration, yes. In these parallel societies, they do have a different ethos. And there is a intolerance of views that are seen as somehow blasphemous. And
so I wonder...
That's a whole different issue.
Right. So if you went around and said had a billboard that said children cannot consent to puberty blockers in a Muslim neighborhood, you probably wouldn't have any problem.
Correct. I don't think you would.
Yeah. In fact, you
probably find a lot of support.
You probably find a lot of support. Okay. So I can't, we when we do this, we have a little stand, and we write some issues to get people started, and then we say, well, what do you want to talk about? It can be one of these or another one. And my favorite that Reed and I have done that I love is aliens are currently visiting us. It's an icebreaker one. People see that and they're like, oh, it's kind of a fun thing, and then we can move on to more controversial issues. But I do think that it's a culture by culture thing. Yeah. I do think that there are certain things that will get people's hackles up. Anyway, thanks so much, man. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the work you do. very, very sincerely and very genuinely thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Can I plug my site?
I'm just going to say, where can people find you?
If people want to support my work, please go to ngolocals.com. As you know, in this line of work, there's not a lot of money to be made, and so a lot of how you and I are able to do what we do is through the generosity of supporters. My website is andy-ngo.com. That's another place you can find my reporting on. I write about Antifa, obviously, but in more recent months, I've been reporting a lot on transgender militancy in the US and sex crimes involving transgender suspects. I think it's important to highlight the full picture of trans in America and not just focus on all the rosy, positive things.
Yeah, I would say it's important to be honest.
Yes.
And we don't see that in the mainstream media. We see equity-based reporting.
We do, unfortunately.